The kingdom of Eldoria was built on strength, pride, and long-standing tradition. Tall stone walls surrounded the royal palace, and banners of gold and crimson waved proudly in the wind. For generations, the people of Eldoria believed their rulers were chosen by destiny itself. A prince, they said, must be brave, strong, fearless, and commanding, a future king who could protect the throne with both sword and voice. But this prince was different. Prince Alaric was born on a quiet night, when the palace bells rang softly instead of loudly. From the moment he entered the world, there was unease. He was small, fragile, and often ill. While other royal children learned to ride horses and lift swords, Alaric struggled to stand for long hours. His hands trembled when he held a blade, and his body tired quickly under the sun. Whispers followed him even as a child. Is he truly fit to rule? Servants murmured behind heavy curtains. He doesn't look like a king, guards muttered during long night watches. Though he wore fine silk clothes and slept on golden sheets, Alaric felt poor in the one thing he needed most: love. His mother, the queen, had died when he was very young. Her absence left a cold space in the palace, one that was soon filled by another woman. The new queen, his stepmother, arrived with grace in her walk and ice in her eyes. She was beautiful, clever, and deeply ambitious. Her smile was sharp, never warm, and it never reached her eyes when she looked at Alaric. To her, the prince was not a child, but an obstacle. She dreamed of power, of control, of shaping the kingdom to her own will. And Alaric's existence stood in her way. Every time she saw his pale face or heard his soft voice, resentment burned quietly inside her. She believed weakness had no place on the throne, and she made sure others believed it too. She spoke softly, but her words carried poison. "He is delicate," she would say to nobles, pretending concern. "Perhaps too gentle for a harsh world." Soon, the doubt spread like shadows at dusk. Nobles exchanged looks during royal gatherings. Servants lowered their voices when Alaric passed. Even the guards, trained to protect him, began to see him as fragile rather than royal. No one spoke openly against the prince, but silence itself became a judgment. Alaric noticed everything. He noticed how conversation stopped when he entered a room. He noticed how his stepmother never praised him, never defended him. He noticed how his father, the king, was always busy, lost in duties, blind to the quiet pain growing inside his son. At night, Alaric often stood by his window, looking down at the city lights beyond the palace walls. He wondered what it felt like to be seen, to be believed in, to be enough. The palace was full of people, yet he had never felt more alone. Still, he did not cry loudly or complain. He carried his pain silently, like a secret too heavy to share. Each day, he woke up and tried again, walking through halls where doubt followed him, bowing his head to those who looked down on him. Inside his heart lived rejection, loneliness, and a quiet strength no one could see. And though the world had already decided his worth, the story of Prince Alaric was only just beginning. From the outside, the royal palace of Eldoria shone brighter than ever. Marble floors reflected golden sunlight, and long halls echoed with music and laughter during grand feasts. But behind those polished walls, something dark and silent was growing, something that fed on fear and control. Queen Maribel, the prince's stepmother, ruled not with loud commands, but with careful smiles and quiet words. Her cruelty was never open. It was hidden, like a sharp blade wrapped in silk. She feared losing power. Before marrying the king, Maribel had lived a life filled with uncertainty. She had learned early that power was safety, and without it, a woman was easily forgotten. Now, as queen, she held influence over the court, the nobles, and even the king himself. But Prince Alaric's existence threatened everything she had built. One day he would grow up. One day he might rule. And on that day, her control would fade. That fear turned into bitterness. In her heart, Maribel believed only her blood deserved the throne. Though she smiled at banquets and praised loyalty, her thoughts were sharp and cold. Alaric was not her son. He was a reminder of another queen, another love, another future she did not choose. So she began her work, quietly. When Alaric asked to study history and leadership, his lessons were delayed or cancelled. When sword masters arrived at the palace, she suggested the prince was too weak to train. His health comes first, she would say sweetly, while watching opportunities slip away from him. Over time, his education grew thin, and others began to notice. Whispers returned. Perhaps he lacks discipline. Maybe the queen knows what she's doing. Maribel also knew how to strike where it hurt most: confidence. She praised him with words that sounded kind, but felt empty. "You are gentle," she would say, "and gentleness has its place." Each sentence carried a quiet message: you are not enough. Prince Alaric tried harder. One afternoon, he stood before the court, reciting lessons he had practiced for weeks. His voice trembled, but he spoke with care. When he finished, the room was silent. He looked to his stepmother first, hoping for a nod, a smile, anything. She barely looked up. Instead, she turned to another noble and changed the subject, as if Alaric had never spoken at all. Laughter followed. The prince felt his face burn with shame, and he stepped back into the shadows, unseen once more. His father, the king, noticed none of it. The king was a good ruler, but a distant father. His days were filled with meetings, wars at the borders, and endless demands from the council. When Alaric tried to speak, the king listened only briefly, distracted and tired. He trusted his queen to guide the household, never questioning her actions. And so, the palace changed. Servants became colder. Tutors stopped caring. Guards looked at Alaric with pity instead of respect. Though the walls sparkled and the banquets grew larger, the prince felt smaller with each passing day. The cruelty never left marks on his body, but it carved deep wounds in his heart. Still, Alaric remained quiet. He bowed his head. He obeyed. He endured. And with every silent insult and every stolen opportunity, the tension inside the palace grew thicker, like a storm waiting to break. What began as quiet whispers inside the palace soon traveled beyond its walls. Like smoke carried by the wind, doubt spread through the streets of Eldoria, reaching the markets, the taverns, and the far corners of the kingdom. People spoke the prince's name with uncertainty, no longer with pride. They called him weak. Merchants shook their heads as they counted coins. Farmers spoke of him while resting under the sun. Even children repeated what they overheard from adults. The story was always the same. Prince Alaric was too soft, too fragile, too uncertain to one day wear the crown. No one could say where the rumors truly began, but many felt they knew the reason. Inside the palace, Queen Maribel's influence grew stronger. Nobles gathered in small groups, their voices low and careful. Advisors nodded as the queen spoke of preparing the kingdom for stability. Her words were calm, but her meaning was clear. A weak prince could destroy everything. Slowly, quietly, the council began to accept her view. Some believed her. Others simply feared standing against her. No one spoke in the prince's defense. Soon, doubt became policy. When a grand ceremony was announced to celebrate the kingdom's strength, Prince Alaric was placed at the center, on display for all to see. The square filled with cheering crowds and bright banners, but Alaric felt his chest tighten as he stepped forward. His armor felt heavy, and the sun burned his skin. This ceremony was meant to show the future king's courage. Instead, it exposed his weakness. He was asked to perform a traditional test, one every royal heir before him had passed. As he tried to lift the ceremonial blade, his hands shook. The sword slipped, falling to the stone with a loud echo that silenced the crowd. Gasps followed. Some laughed. Others turned away in disappointment. The moment stretched on, cruel and unforgiving. Alaric's face flushed with shame as he bent to retrieve the blade, his heart pounding. From the balcony above, Queen Maribel watched closely. Her face showed concern, but her eyes held quiet satisfaction. That single moment defined him. By nightfall, the story had spread across Eldoria. The prince who could not lift a sword. the heir who embarrassed the crown. What the people did not see was the effort he had made, the pain he hid, the strength he carried inside. Inside, Alaric was not weak. He was thoughtful. He listened when others spoke. He cared about the lives of common people, about fairness and kindness. But none of that could be seen in a public square or measured by a blade. Alone in his chamber, Alaric sat in silence, replaying the moment again and again. The laughter, the looks, the weight of 1,000 eyes judging him. Outside his window, the kingdom slept, unaware that they had already decided his fate. And in that silence, the prince realized something painful and true. He was no longer just doubted by the palace. The entire kingdom had turned away from him. The moment that shattered Prince Alaric did not come with a shout or a strike of steel. It arrived quietly, wrapped in lies, and delivered by the very people who were meant to protect him. A sudden crisis struck the kingdom of Eldoria. One morning, the royal treasury was found in chaos. Important documents were missing, seals were broken, and whispers of betrayal filled the palace halls. The council gathered in fear, and guards were questioned one by one. The kingdom needed someone to blame, and Queen Maribel already had a name prepared. She spoke calmly before the council, her voice heavy with concern. She hinted at carelessness, at poor judgment, at a prince who wandered the palace late at night. She never accused him directly. She didn't need to. The doubt she had planted for years now grew on its own. All eyes turned to Prince Alaric. The evidence was weak, but suspicion was strong. Alaric stood alone in the great hall, his heart pounding as voices rose around him. He tried to speak, to explain, but his words felt small against the noise of judgment. The king listened in silence. When he finally looked at his son, there was disappointment in his eyes, deep and painful. It was worse than anger. Anger could fade. Disappointment stayed. "I expected better," the king said quietly. Those words cut deeper than any punishment. Though no proof truly tied Alaric to the crime, the council agreed he had failed the kingdom. The queen lowered her head, pretending sorrow. Inside, her plan had succeeded. Alaric accepted the blame. He did not fight it. He did not beg. After years of doubt, part of him believed he deserved it. The palace guards escorted him through halls he had walked since childhood, but now they felt foreign and cold. That night, alone in his chamber, the prince finally broke. He stared at the walls, once symbols of safety, now closing in on him. He questioned everything, his worth, his place, his future. The hope he had held onto for so long slipped away. Maybe they were right. Maybe he truly was a mistake. Before dawn, a decision was made. The king, pressed by the council and guided by the queen's soft advice, declared that the prince would leave the palace. Officially, it was for his own good, to learn humility, to grow away from courtly pressure. Unofficially, it was exile. When Alaric stepped beyond the palace gates, no crowd followed. No farewell was given. He turned once, looking back at the towering walls of Eldoria, and felt something inside him close forever. The boy who believed in the crown was gone. Ahead of him lay the unknown, and a life he never imagined he would have to live. The world beyond the palace gates felt larger and colder than Prince Alaric had ever imagined. For the first time in his life, there were no guards walking behind him, no servants waiting for his call, no soft beds or warm meals prepared in silence. The road ahead was long, dusty, and uncertain. Each step away from Eldoria felt like a step into a life he was never trained to live. At first, fear followed him closely. He did not know how to earn food or where to sleep when night fell. His hands, once used to holding books, now trembled as he tried to start small fires or lift heavy tools. Hunger became a familiar ache, and cold nights taught him how thin his royal cloak truly was. Many times he considered turning back, but the palace gates never reopened. Alaric wandered from village to village, blending into crowds that did not bow or whisper. To them, he was just another young man with tired eyes and worn shoes. Some days, he worked in fields under the hot sun, his body aching in ways he had never felt before. Other days, He carried goods for merchants who barely looked at him. Each task humbled him. He learned quickly that respect was not given, it was earned. When he made mistakes, no one excused him. When he succeeded, no one praised him loudly. Life moved on, steady and unforgiving. One evening, he shared a fire with a poor family whose home had burned down. They spoke of loss, of hunger, of children who went to bed hungry. As Alaric listened, shame filled his chest. He had thought himself broken, but these people endured pain far greater than his own, without crowns or protection. That night, something changed. For the first time, Alaric felt connected to others. Their suffering opened his eyes. His pain no longer felt lonely, it felt shared. Slowly, he grew stronger. Not in ways the palace would recognize, but in ways that mattered. He learned patience while waiting for work, courage while facing rejection, kindness while helping others despite having little himself. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how leaders emerged naturally among the people, not through titles, but through care and action. He saw how trust was built through honesty, not fear. These lessons stayed with him, shaping his thoughts in quiet moments. Though no one called him prince anymore, Alaric began to feel something he never had before: purpose. He was still uncertain, still afraid at times. But the boy who once believed he was worthless no longer existed. As he walked beneath open skies, far from the palace walls, Alaric carried a new strength inside him, one born not from privilege, but from survival. And though the world had yet to see it, the true making of a king had begun. Time did not heal Prince Alaric in a single season. It shaped him slowly, like water carving stone. Days turned into months, and months into years. The boy who once walked out of the palace with bowed head was no longer the same. Life among the people changed him. Alaric no longer woke with fear each morning. He rose early to work, his hands rough now, his body stronger from honest labor. But the greatest change was not seen on his skin. It lived inside his mind and heart. Hard days taught him patience. Failure taught him humility. Kindness, even in poverty, taught him hope. He learned leadership without ever being called a leader. When a farmer fell sick, Alaric took over his work without being asked. When villagers argued, he listened before speaking, choosing calm over anger. Slowly, people began to trust him. Not because of who he was, but because of what he did. Trust built quiet alliances. Travelers, workers, and villagers came to know him as someone fair and dependable. They shared meals with him, shared worries, and sometimes shared dreams of a better life. Alaric learned that real power did not come from commands, it came from service. At night, he thought of Eldoria. He remembered the cold halls, the fear-driven council, and the pain of being unseen. Now he understood what the palace never taught him. A ruler must feel the weight of the people's lives. A ruler must protect the weak, not judge them. These thoughts stayed with him. There were moments, small and strange, when destiny seemed to whisper his name. An old soldier once recognized the way Alaric stood, straight and calm. A traveling merchant spoke of unrest in the capital, unaware he spoke to the kingdom's lost heir. Each moment passed quietly, but they felt meaningful. Alaric did not rush toward his past. He was still healing, still learning, but he no longer doubted his worth. In the quiet strength he had built, there was something steady and unbreakable. The crown no longer defined him. But one day, he knew, he might be ready to redefine the crown. And somewhere far beyond the villages and roads, fate was already preparing his return. Back within the towering walls of Eldoria, the palace no longer felt strong or steady. Though the banners still flew high and the halls shone with gold, something beneath the surface was breaking. Queen Maribel now held greater influence than ever. With Prince Alaric gone, her voice became the loudest in the council chamber. She advised quickly, decided firmly, and pushed the kingdom toward harsh choices. Taxes were raised to fund projects meant to show power, not protect people. Soldiers were sent where they were not needed, while villages closer to the borders were left undefended. The people began to suffer. Markets grew quiet. Farmers struggled under new demands. Small arguments turned into open anger. The kingdom that once trusted its rulers now questioned them. But every concern was answered with the same cold promise: order would return soon. Inside the palace, fear replaced confidence. Nobles argued more than they agreed. Advisors shifted blame instead of offering solutions. Queen Maribel's plans, once praised, now revealed cracks. Decisions made to secure her control weakened the kingdom's heart. And still, no one spoke the prince's name. Yet his absence was felt everywhere. There was no gentle voice to listen, no steady presence to calm tension. The king noticed it during long meetings, in moments of silence, when no one offered wisdom, only ambition. Slowly, painfully, he remembered the son he had sent away. Regret crept in. The king walked the halls alone at night, passing doors that once belonged to Alaric. He remembered his quiet eyes, his careful words, and the patience he never valued. Doubt, he realized too late, had blinded him. Meanwhile, Queen Maribel's schemes began to fail. Allies turned distant. Nobles questioned her advice. Rumors spread, not about the prince this time, but about her motives. The control she once held began to slip through her fingers. The kingdom stood at the edge of collapse. And for the first time, the king understood the cost of his silence. Far beyond the palace walls, destiny stirred, waiting for the one they had pushed away. The road to Eldoria had not changed, but the man walking upon it had. Prince Alaric returned quietly, without banners or guards. He wore simple clothes, his face marked by time and experience. Yet there was something about the way he walked, steady, calm, unafraid, that made people look twice. This was not the broken boy who had once left the palace in shame. This was a man who knew who he was. As he entered the outer streets of the kingdom, whispers followed him again, but this time, they were different. People noticed how he greeted them with respect, how he listened before he spoke. Some felt a strange familiarity they could not explain, as if hope itself had taken shape and walked among them. Word reached the palace before Alaric did. The king heard first. When he was told that a man claiming to be the prince had returned, his heart tightened. Fear, regret, and longing rose together. He remembered the boy he had doubted, and the silence he had chosen instead of truth. Queen Maribel heard next. For the first time in years, her confidence cracked. The name alone disturbed her calm. She had believed exile would erase him. Seeing his influence grow, even before his arrival, made her uneasy. The control she once held now felt fragile. When Alaric finally entered the palace gates, the air shifted. Servants froze in place. Guards stood straighter. Nobles whispered behind gloved hands. The prince did not rush or bow his head. He walked forward with quiet strength, his eyes clear, his posture firm. Some did not recognize him at first. Others did and felt ashamed. The memory of his past weakness clashed with the man before them. This Alaric did not demand respect. He carried it naturally. His silence spoke louder than any command. The king stepped forward slowly, his voice unsteady. He saw not just his son, but the cost of his own doubts standing before him. Queen Maribel watched from a distance, her hands clenched. For the first time, fear found its way into her heart. The prince she once dismissed had returned stronger, not with an army, but with truth. Tension filled the hall. This was not a moment for swords or shouts.
It was heavier than that.
Every eye waited, every breath held. Years of pain, betrayal, and silence gathered between them. Alaric met his stepmother's gaze without anger. He did not seek revenge. He sought justice. And as he stood there, calm, unbroken, and unafraid, the kingdom began to understand something they had missed for far too long. They had doubted the wrong man. The confrontation was coming, not with violence, but with truth strong enough to change everything. The palace was quiet that day, but the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Courtiers and servants moved carefully, aware that something was shifting, though none could yet name it. Prince Alaric stood in the great hall, calm and composed. His eyes, steady and clear, surveyed the faces around him, not with anger, but with patience. Years of exile had taught him the power of endurance, and he had learned that true strength was quiet, not loud. The truth began to surface, not through accusation, but through consequence. Advisors who had supported Queen Maribel's schemes faltered under scrutiny. Documents she had tampered with were uncovered. Villages that had suffered under her misguided orders came forward, their stories undeniable. Slowly, the pattern of manipulation and deceit revealed itself. The queen's web of control unraveled, thread by thread. Alaric could have demanded punishment. He could have struck with authority or revenge, as many whispered he might. But he did not. Instead, he chose dignity. He understood that power earned through fear was empty, and that justice without wisdom was hollow. He turned to his father. The king, who had once doubted, now looked upon his son with a mixture of sorrow and awe. Alaric stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his father's shoulder. "I have returned," he said softly, "not for revenge, but for the kingdom. And for us, father." Tears welled in the king's eyes. He bowed his head, ashamed of the years lost to doubt and inattention. "My son, I failed you," he whispered. "I see now what I should have always known." Alaric offered a small smile. "We both have learned," he said. "It is not too late to do what is right." The hall turned to Queen Maribel. Her face, once composed and sharp, now revealed fear and desperation. She had believed she could manipulate truth itself, but the consequences of her actions had overtaken her. No words of the prince were needed. Her own deeds had led her to the edge of ruin. Alaric did not speak harshly. He did not demand her removal. Instead, he left her to face the outcomes of her choices, her loss of respect, the broken trust of the court, and the isolation she had created. Justice, he understood, often arrived through truth itself. The people of Eldoria watched quietly, seeing not just a prince, but a leader. One who had endured suffering, learned from it, and returned not with anger, but with wisdom. In Alaric, they saw mercy, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing both loss and love. And in that hall, as father and son stood side by side, the kingdom began to heal. The past would not be forgotten, but it had been met with understanding, not vengeance. Eldoria would move forward, not because of fear or cruelty, but because of justice tempered with compassion. Prince Alaric had proven that true worth was measured not by power or position, but by the strength of heart and mind, and the courage to forgive. The sun rose over Eldoria, painting the palace walls in gold. For the first time in years, the kingdom felt whole, not because of wealth or splendor, but because of understanding. Prince Alaric stood at the balcony of the great hall, the wind brushing against his face. The boy who had been doubted, humiliated, and exiled had returned not with anger, but with wisdom and strength earned through hardship. He looked out over the city, villagers working the fields, merchants arranging their stalls, children running freely, and felt the weight of what he had learned. Leadership, he realized, was never about titles or privilege. It was about listening, protecting, and serving. It was about patience, humility, and courage when no one was watching. The crown on his head would not make him a king. The lessons he had endured would. The people of Eldoria no longer saw a fragile boy. They saw a man who had walked among them, who had shared their struggles, and who had returned to guide them with compassion and justice. Their cheers were not empty ritual. They were recognition of someone who had earned their trust. The king approached quietly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. No words were needed. In their eyes, the past regrets, doubts, and mistakes were acknowledged and forgiven. Alaric nodded, carrying both the weight and the honor of what had been earned. Queen Maribel had been removed from power, not through wrath, but by the consequences of her choices. The court understood that leadership belonged not to those who sought it for themselves, but to those who proved worthy through character and perseverance. Alaric closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting on the long path he had walked, the humiliation, the exile, the nights of fear and doubt. Each moment of pain had built him into someone capable of true leadership. Each trial had revealed the strength that even the palace walls could not teach. When he opened his eyes, the sun caught the crown above his head, glinting like hope itself. Eldoria had not simply found a ruler, they had found a leader who understood that worth is never given, it is earned. And in that understanding, the kingdom breathed anew, ready to follow a prince who had been forged by struggle, guided by wisdom, and crowned by perseverance. The journey had ended, but the story of courage, resilience, and hope would echo in Eldoria for generations.